By the time a layoff is announced, the decision was made weeks ago, sometimes months ago. The meeting where they tell you, the one where your boss sits across from you with that rehearsed expression and a folder from HR. That's the last step in a process. That started long before you had any idea it was happening, and the person sitting across from you delivering the news already knew. Your boss already knew. They sat in meetings about it. They reviewed lists with your name on them. They made recommendations about who should stay and who should go. And then they came back to their desk and acted normal. They assigned you work on Tuesday. They gave you positive feedback on Wednesday. They smiled in the hallway on Thursday, all while knowing your name was on a list that would change your life. That's not cruelty. That's how companies operate. That's the protocol. And if you don't understand the timeline behind layoffs, you'll never see them coming until someone's handing you a box for your desk. Here's how the process actually works in most organizations of meaningful size. It starts with a financial trigger. Revenue misses a target. A product line underperforms. A merger closes and suddenly there's headcount redundancy. A board meeting produces a mandate to cut operating costs by a percentage. That percentage gets translated into headcount. Headcount gets translated into names. Real names. Your name potentially. The first people who know are the executives. The C-suite. They sit in a room with finance leadership and HR leadership and look at org charts. They don't look at individual performance data first. They look at functions. Which departments are overstaffed relative to the new budget? Which teams have overlapping roles that can be consolidated? Which projects are being cut? And who's attached to those projects? That's the first filter. It's structural, not personal. It has nothing to do with whether you're good at your job. It has everything to do with what the company has decided to stop paying for. But it becomes personal very quickly. Once they identify the departments, the conversation moves down one level. Directors and senior managers get pulled into confidential meetings. They sign non-disclosure agreements or are verbally warned about the consequences of leaking. And then they're told, we need to reduce your team by 2 head count, or 3, or 5. Pick the names, and this is where it gets real, because that manager now has to choose. And the criteria they use are almost never what you think they are. You assume they'll cut the worst performer. Sometimes they do, but more often they run a completely different calculation. Who can I lose with the least disruption to the work I still need to deliver? Whose responsibilities can be redistributed most easily? Who has the least institutional knowledge? Who's the most operationally replaceable right now? And critically, who won't create a legal risk if we let them go? That last one matters more than most people realize. If someone recently filed a complaint, or is currently on medical leave, or recently disclosed a protected status, or recently returned from parental leave, the company's lawyers will flag that name as high risk for litigation. Not because they care about that employee's well-being, because they care about the cost of a lawsuit. So that person stays, and someone else, someone who didn't file a complaint, someone who didn't take leave, someone who didn't create any legal complexity, they go instead. The manager also thinks about their own survival. If they lose their best people, their team's output drops. And if the team underperforms after the layoff, the next round of cuts might include the manager. So they sometimes sacrifice the person they can most easily live without, rather than the person who's technically the weakest performer. Those are different lists. And here's the part that really stings. While all of this is happening, while your name is being discussed in rooms you've never entered, your boss is still giving you assignments. They're still inviting you to meetings. They might even tell you you're doing a great job, not because they're deliberately lying, because HR and legal have instructed every manager involved in the process to maintain normalcy until the official announcement date. HR controls the communication timeline with precision. There's a specific day, sometimes a specific hour, when all affected employees are told simultaneously. Before that moment, management is under strict instructions not to signal anything, not to reduce anyone's workload, not to change anyone's system access, not to behave differently in any way that could be construed as constructive dismissal, or that could tip someone off and trigger a premature resignation or a legal claim. So your boss walks around with this information for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, sometimes longer, knowing what's about to happen to you and acts like everything is fine. That's not betrayal. That's compliance with a process they didn't design, couldn't override, and were told they'd face consequences for violating. Now, here's what you need to understand about the warning signs. Because even though the company tries to keep the process sealed, it leaks. Not through announcements or memos, through behavior, through the small things that change before anyone says anything official. The first sign is silence from above. If leadership suddenly stops talking about the future of the company or the team, if quarterly updates get vague and start leaning heavily on words like efficiency and optimization and right-sizing, something is changing. Companies don't use the word efficiency when things are going well and growing. They use it when they're preparing to contract. If the language shifts from growth to sustainability, start paying attention. The second sign is hiring freezes that nobody explains. When open positions suddenly disappear from the careers page, when your team's approved headcount gets quietly reduced, when that role they promised to fill gets pushed to next quarter without a clear reason, that's not a timing issue. That's a company conserving cash before a contraction. The positions aren't delayed. They're being absorbed into the layoff math. The third sign is changes to your access or your assignments. If you suddenly lose access to a system you used to have, or your project gets reassigned without explanation, or you stop being invited to meetings you were always part of, someone has started the process of separating you from the work, not because they forgot to include you, because they're reducing your operational footprint before the formal separation so the transition is smoother on their end. The fourth sign is the unexpected skip-level meeting. If your boss's boss, someone who normally doesn't interact with you directly, suddenly schedules a one-on-one or asks you to coffee, that's probably not mentorship. That's assessment. They're either evaluating whether you're on the right list or gathering the last piece of information they need to justify a decision that's already been made. The fifth sign is the strange project. If you get pulled into something that feels disconnected from your core work, something short-term with a defined end date and no clear connection to your usual responsibilities, that's sometimes a holding pattern. They're giving you something to do so your calendar looks normal until the announcement date. Not every one of these signs means you're getting cut. Sometimes a hiring freeze is just a hiring freeze. Sometimes a skip level is genuine interest. But when you see 3 or 4 of these signals happening within the same few weeks, stop assuming it's coincidence. The universe isn't giving you signs. The company is leaking its plan. So what do you do when you suspect a layoff is coming? First, start documenting your contributions immediately. Not for the company, for yourself. Pull together your wins, your metrics, your impact numbers, your project outcomes. Screenshot them, download them, save them somewhere outside the company's systems. Because the day you lose access, and it will happen faster than you think, you lose the ability to prove what you did. And you'll need that evidence for your resume, for interviews, and for negotiating your next offer. Second, warm up your network now, not after the announcement. Now. Reach out to former colleagues. Reconnect with recruiters you've been ignoring. Update your resume. Update your LinkedIn. Start having conversations. The worst time to start a job search is the day you get laid off, when you're emotional and reactive. The best time is 3 weeks before, when you still have a title, an email address, and the appearance of stability. Third, understand your severance before you need it. Look at your company's severance policy. Look at your employment contract. Know what you're legally entitled to before you're sitting in a room being handed a packet, and ask to sign within 48 hours. In that moment, you'll be emotional. You'll be shocked, even if you saw it coming. And emotional people make bad deals. Understand the terms in advance so you can evaluate them calmly. Fourth, do not confront your boss. If you suspect something, don't walk in and ask, "Am I being laid off?" Your boss will either lie because they've been instructed to, or they'll panic because you just signaled that the process leaked. Neither outcome helps you. Use the time to prepare quietly, not to confirm publicly. Fifth, think about what you'd negotiate if it happens. Severance is often negotiable, especially if you have leverage, like knowledge of something the company wouldn't want disclosed, or a non-compete they want enforced, or tenure that makes a standard package seem insufficient. Think about what you'd ask for while you're still thinking clearly. Here's the hardest truth about layoffs. They're rarely about you. They're about math. A number on a spreadsheet that someone 3 levels above your boss decided needed to be smaller. Your name ended up on a list not because you failed, but because your role fell on the wrong side of a calculation you were never part of. And the worst part isn't the layoff itself. The worst part is the asymmetry. The weeks before it happened, when your boss knew and you didn't, when they looked you in the eye and gave you feedback on a project that would never matter, when they acted like the future was normal. That asymmetry of information is the real injury, not the job loss, the fact that they knew and you didn't. And by the time you found out, the only power you had left was negotiating how you leave.